So the former Blizzard CEO just blasted the WoW team, talking about how during Shadowlands he wanted the direction to focus on the Lich King, the whole Arthas storyline, how he wanted WoW to reset how he wanted WoW 2, and how Blizzard should have catered more to the hardcore core audience instead of the casuals. Well, this kind of explains why the story was just all over the place a few years back, with Arthas showing up in the worst way possible and the World Soul Saga attempting to be like a reset of WoW 2 in a way. Let's look at this, as so far this is the best insider info we had gotten into the development of the game. This is not some leaked info, just the main guy in charge talking about what has been happening to WoW. The World Soul Saga is so confusing, so I decided to ask the World Soul herself a couple questions on what is going on so we can finally get some answers. As you can see, she isn't as confused as she is concerned about the whole thing, and this is all possible with Polybuzz. Nazad also told me a little bit about his plans, as well as Troll, who is still confused as well about what is going on. You can literally just put a whole wiki page in your favorite lore figure, create the voices, the images, and you can have completely immersive conversations. You can even put in your own WoW character in here with your own lore and have your own personal companion you can talk to. You can try it out completely free with my link in the description and use code DOR99. Check out Polybuzz. So it's not really an unpopular opinion, and there has been a lot of speculation about WoW 2, as well as more war being added to Warcraft and more prominence of the Lich King, but this one is kind of interesting to discuss because we are getting some insight from Blizzard directly and the higher-ups about what has actually been going on for a few years back. I also think it's pretty easy to see that times have been rough at Blizzard for the past like 5-6 years, which has been kind of reflected, especially in the story, as we're just kind of going all over the place and there just isn't really a consistent narrative. It only became a bit more consistent with the World Soul Saga, but even now it is definitely kind of all over the place and confusing. So what I'm talking about here is actually a couple of tweets from Mike Ibarra, the former Blizzard CEO, that really gives us some insight into what has been happening. Now, before we get further into this, I just want to say that I do think it is a bit hypocritical, because this guy was not only the CEO during probably the worst times of WoW, but he also made some decisions that caused most of the problems to the end. I mean, here he was responding to an article about WoW's latest patch having a giant list of bugs, and this guy literally fired like the whole Q&A department, which is like one of those, if it's not the consequences of my own actions type moments. I am feeling a little bit of like an old kid right now, but honestly, I mean, I still remember the days when Blizzard was like the company that was like the synonym for quality. It's probably been about a decade since then, but Blizzard back in the day, if you guys remember, really stood out. I mean, they took their time, everything was super polished. Post 2020, I mean, Blizzard really went downhill in quality, in cinematic quality, in writing quality. It was much more about just maxing out profits, and let's be real, I mean, this CEO was here at the peak of this whole new wave. However, as opposed to some other CEOs that probably don't even know about Warcraft, he did actually play the game. So in this tweet, he was talking about how WoW has to reset or it will continue to decline, and they asked him what reset did he advocate while he was active at Blizzard. He mentions a few things about how WoW should be more about the war aspect, the conflict, the struggle, the risk, the reward, as well as that there must always be a Lich King. He wanted the expansion to go back to the whole Arthas thing and take that story much further. In my opinion, this probably explains the entire disastrous handling of Arthas and the whole Shadowlands ordeal and the Lich King and the Burger King crown. Mike Ibarra was the CEO from like mid Shadowlands up to like 2024, and he might have pushed for this, and then they just kind of did the whole thing. It was me, the jailer behind Arthas this entire time, which honestly pissed off the audience more. If they they should just kind of skip the entire ordeal. Furthermore, he talks about how he wanted to focus more on the core audience, the more hardcore raids, instead of pandering to the casuals, and he also talked about how they were considering WoW 2 like a brand new game back around Shadowlands, instead of just constantly just churning out single expansions one after the other. He thinks Blizzard just doesn't have the core team anymore for something like this. He also talks about how while he was president of Blizzard, he really didn't didn't have that much input on the story itself. It was mostly on the game director, who owns the creative vision for the game. Ian Hazzikostas was essentially the main responsible person for the direction, while the president was more focused on the business side of things, hiring, probably firing more people if anything. However, he does say that Ian did listen to him, but honestly, to me, this kind of explains the disaster of the story the past 2 years and why it went like this. So think of it, I mean, essentially the CEO of the company, the main person in charge, wanted the Lich King and WoW 2, but they couldn't exactly pull that off out of thin air. So the game director did pander, but he was like doing it in a way that doesn't make anyone happy. I'm talking like, instead of having a story focused on the Lich King, they just had the story all over the place involving Arthas just shoehorned in, and the new crown and everything, and it just ended up being a disaster. Instead of committing to WoW 2, they figured out a saga, like the way to restart the expansion cycle, like the expansion after expansion, but we can't say that worked out all that well either. I mean, sure, we will see in the last Titan, but the problem is that it's still, I mean, at the moment, the story is still all over the place. You might have noticed this, but not only did Blizzard quality decline quite a bit over the past few years, but the jobs also became a lot less stable. I mean, you guys have noticed that a lot of devs have been changing, as well as the CEOs themselves, so the game director trying to pander to the CEO and the audience at the same time probably just ended up not making anyone happy, so they were just kinda stuck in a place of damned if you do, damned if you don't. Recently, the community did start discussing WoW 2, and this has been something we've been talking about for such a long time, but honestly, at this point, now that I consider it, I just don't think it is too realistic. I don't necessarily think we're going to get that after the World Soul Saga. Maybe a decade ago or even a few years ago, it would have made sense, but now it is just kind of different. We're probably going to get a reset or something big happening after the saga. We might get Classic Plus, which is going to be something akin to WoW starting from scratch, but then building up Azeroth all over again just doesn't seem realistic or feasible. I mean, with how big WoW is, they would need at least like 5 years of just straight out development with no product released, and that will be released in like, what, 2035? The world has also significantly changed since 2004 as well. I mean, MMORPGs are just objectively not as popular as they were back in the day. The whole genre is just not as mainstream as it was back in the day. However, some things that Mike about to talk about do make sense. I mean, not necessarily that we can return back to the Lich King himself, because that storyline is just kind of beyond repair right now, with the helmet being destroyed, Arthas being destroyed. Even if they do retcon and change some things, they can never really go back to the Wrath era with the story as it was back in the day. However, going to that feel could actually be possible. I mean, like a villain that is not working on some universe-shattering plan that is constantly teasing us for like 7 years with nothing happening and we have no idea what his plan is. I mean, Arthas, as you guys might remember, was a pretty straightforward villain. I mean, he just raised his undead army and sent them out to attack us. There was no crazy plan a million steps ahead, but the story still made a ton of sense back in the day. I mean, it was definitely a threat that you felt. Realistically, this is also a problem with WoW being like 22 years old. I mean, you just can't keep pushing the story with the same hype level, but I do think the last Titan could pull us out of the whole Midnight story that has so far been very underwhelming. I mean, right now, the Devouring Host is like Zeltat's army. People don't even know that Zeltat's army is called the Devouring Host. It is realistically the biggest threat to Azeroth ever, yet no one really cares. It just doesn't feel as powerful as the Scourge or the Legion, not even close to the same level. So some type of returning to more old school stuff could be possible post the last Titan or during the last Titan, especially as we are going to Northrend, but who knows. Thanks for watching. Check out a possible friendly undead faction we could discover in Northrend by clicking on the screen, and subscribe to my brand new Witcher lore channel that I recently opened by clicking on the screen as well. See you next time!